I would like to talk a bit about stewardship from the perspective of linking care, knowledge, and agency. And I think Terry in his talk already talked about these three components. But I would like to start with just recapping a little bit, or kind of reminding what does this idea of Earth stewardship, what does it create space for? Some things that I would really like to emphasize. And then Terry, in his work, both as a scientist and outside of in his interaction with society. Oh, I also want to say that I'm very honored and very happy to be here to contribute to the discussion of this topic, but also to be part of honoring you, Terry. So, thank you. Yes, so that Earth stewardship is a concept talking about global sustainability, but that really embodies the notion of humans and nature and people and planet together, as Terry was saying before. And I think there's not so many of those around, so it's really important for that purpose, I think. And also, as Terry has also contributed a lot to the role and importance of ecology in understanding stewardship and for navigating a sustainable future. But in his work, he's also been opening up for other ways of knowledge and understanding, and emphasizing that the importance of that for stewardship. And this point of thinking about connecting ecology and natural sciences with the ethics, and connecting the descriptive with also the normative parts. And again, then stewardship as a fundamentally normative concept, but based on kind of also scientific understanding. And I think that's really, again, in this human-dominated world, it is a really important aspect. And then the last part that I will emphasize a little bit, particularly in my talk, the care and responsibility point. And Terry kept coming back to that in different aspects of that in his talk as well. And I know in your work you've been engaged in, for example, concepts like sense of place, but also indigenous and local knowledge, and how that incorporates a more relational understanding of nature and embeds the care component. So Earth stewardship is a really important boundary object for inter- and transdisciplinary research, being able to connect these different dimensions and also actually connecting with people outside academia. So for interdisciplinary research, connecting expertise within the natural science, but also in the social science and the humanities. And the transdisciplinary components of interacting with society as well. And the work through the recent year that Terry has been a key part of is really to manifest this notion within conservation science, but also with sustainability science. So I just wanted to start with that. But this notion of stewardship, of course, has many and diverse roots. So I think what we mainly talk about today is this kind of research approach, but a research approach that moves outside these classical notions of what is objective research, and actively thinking about shaping change, but also including this greater focus on normativity and inter- and transdisciplinarity. But it also has a long history of being emphasized as this ethical relation between people and nature. So I used some fairly recent references there, but it also has a long history within the philosophy and the humanities. But it also, outside of academia, it's often understood as a policy scheme or a legislation frame, so that are trying to stimulate or encourage certain sets of activities, like a Marine Stewardship Council. So when you bring in this idea of stewardship, it's understood and used differently in different contexts. So in this group of colleagues within the Biosphere Stewardship stream at the SRC, we started doing this kind of review or thinking about what are these different meanings about around stewardship, and really thinking about this, the notion of stewardship as a useful boundary object that can facilitate change processes, and a way that Terry was also talking about, negotiate different meanings and connecting different diverse values and understandings. So what we've landed on in this process was to think about three different spheres or realms of perspectives on stewardship, one linked to knowledge, one to care, and one to agency. And I think we heard quite a bit about the knowledge, the need for understandings of where we are and where we're going, and understanding the framings of living in the Anthropocene. So it's about facts and information, but it's also about systems understanding and interdisciplinarity, but also the learning and how that's been embedded in practice, etc. But again, we kept coming back to the component on care, and I think that's, again, what's quite unique about stewardship, that it recognizes and acknowledges the role of individual and collective sense of responsibility and relations with human nature relations, and how that's embedded in different features in socio-ecological systems, the values, the norms, senses of attachment and belonging, etc. And the third realm then about agency, because it's not enough just knowing what to do and actually caring about things. There's also matters that you're able to do it, that there's the means, the opportunities, or the context where you can actually act on this knowledge. So we thought of these three realms as a useful tool to kind of navigate and create greater understanding of how the different contributions, but different disciplines and different ways of understanding what stewardship is and can be. And I want to emphasize a little bit, in particular, the care one, as it's often mentioned and talked about, but haven't been so much engaged in. What does it actually mean? How does these notions of care and the ethical relationships, how does it actually lead to action or inform a kind of actions needed? So just to give an example of the need to interlink care, knowledge, and agency. So it comes from restoring wetlands, or groups that are restoring urban wetlands in Bangalore in India, where there were regional, or actually local, residential groups who started caring about their neighborhood lakes and wanted to restore them because they were actually quite dirty and eutrophied and so on. So they came together and started to mobilize energy and resources to restore them, but quite quickly went into obstacles because they didn't have any management rights or any resources to actually change things in this lake. So they needed to connect with the agency that sits with authorities, the city authorities, as well. And then, of course, to restore these lakes, and they wanted to create biodiversity-rich habitats for birds, etc. They needed ecological knowledge to understand how to restore them, to be able to recreate these habitats. But also, actually, local knowledge with the communities that had once created these lakes as an irrigation system. So that's then, in this case, the care was the entry point, and linking the agents and knowledge to lead to kind of stewardship action at the core of this, in this way of viewing this. So, coming back to emphasizing the role of care, but also viewing care as it's embedded in this kind of rope of stewardship, where the strands of the rope of care, knowledge, agency is reinforcing each other. So care as a responsibility, attachment, and belonging. And how this notion of care, in the broader sense, can motivate action, but it is also motivating what kinds of action we're doing and what kinds of knowledge we are generating and looking for. And coming back to the questions, I mean, so often sense of place, for example, is used to study individual attachment, but often knowledge or care is then embedded in cultural, collective, but also spiritual and faith-based ways of looking at the world. And this figure and this image comes from a recent paper that I did with colleagues, and is actually very much based on their PhD research, and many of them are in the audience, where we try to use kind of relational thinking as an entry point to think more about how can we better understand care, the care component of stewardship. And we used kind of bodies of literature around sense of place, around biocultural relations, and embodied perspective, a dwelling perspective, to contribute theory and methods also to better understand how care can drive stewardship action. And wanting to also link to indigenous and local knowledge systems. So Terry connected a little bit with that in his talk. And one part that I want to emphasize here is about that, or diversity of notions of care and knowledge, and how indigenous and local knowledge systems are often have a different way of thinking about this more relational way of viewing nature, and how that's also embedded in the knowledge and way of doing things. And it's also about connecting this local perspective to the global. So this image here is from this recent report that came out this spring from the IPBES, this UN-affiliated body that synthesizes knowledge about ecosystems and biodiversity. So the global, the figure is from the global synthesis, and it's emphasized all these different ways that indigenous and local knowledge are creating and co-creating biodiversity and ecosystem services. And one of them, okay, I don't know if I dare to use this, the one here, emphasizing how it's about alternative values and worldviews that can inform sustainability pathways. And the key point here is in the middle. I actually added this map there to the IPBES figure. It's a map from Garnet et al. From last year, and it's showing the proportion of lands in different parts of the world that are still controlled and managed and inhabited by local people or indigenous communities. So it's actually quite a lot of land. So it does matter. These kind of local connections of care and reciprocity can matter for global governance, or not that it can matter. It actually does matter for global governance of biodiversity and ecosystem services. So I think this report is really, it's really exciting to see how that comes together and starts to become a globalized view. And one of the key messages of this global assessment report is this, the quote that I have there: nature is generally declining less in indigenous people's land than in other lands, but is nevertheless declining, and so is the knowledge of how to manage it. So saying actually that the drivers that act on biodiversity loss also act on the communities and the governance system that are managing this diversity. And actually, that's something I would like to emphasize here, that it is about knowledge, but it's also about governance system, and how that governance system is often embedded in a relational or a value-based, where the values are more explicit and based in a sense of relation, reciprocity and care. Not wanting to romanticize that, because there's also communities, they're living in the realities of the Anthropocene and the globalized world. So it's not always possible to act, that they have the agency to act on the knowledge and care. But it's a very important resource for us, especially to think about global governance. So again, how can we think beyond the local and make implications about this? So here I want to reiterate what Terry said about dialogue, and how transparent and respectful dialogue to identify shared values and concerns and negotiate areas of disagreement, actually bringing out this normative into the open, and really talk about the different ways of understanding where we want to go and how. And I am sharing here some images with you from a workshop that we did in the Karang community in northern Thailand earlier this year. This walking workshop for weaving knowledge systems, where the idea was to connect this kind of local and global concern, and we used the pollination assessment from the IPBES to negotiate, or to actually talk about different sources of knowledge. And we're trying to do this in a way that we are emphasizing equity, transparency and usefulness for all involved, but also that we're trying to run this workshop in a way that when we are really embedded in this biocultural, place-based relationships and the spirituality that is there. It actually shifts the kind of conversations you're able to have when you are embedded in these kind of values, and you clearly see how the values are really important for management and governance, but also has this more deeper meanings as well. And what we find in this workshop and the outcomes and the evaluation is that how doing this in this way and really trying to connect with both understanding the local sense of the local values and sense of care, but being hosted and invited into that, it creates this shared sense of urgency that comes again with a care and a commitment that can connect across diverse interests. And I also want to reiterate what was said before about process, how it is really or stewardship as a process, and how critical it is to have these dialogues and running process in a way that you are able to connect knowledge, co-production of knowledge and knowledge generations with agency and care. So I couldn't resist putting this as my last slide, because I wanted to just say that I think, Terry, that I see you as a very dedicated steward of Earth Stewardship. And as such, you're a very important and a role model for research in sustainability science. and about how you both are contributing to the knowledge generation and the knowledge co-production, but also how you bring in your care, obviously, because I think you need care to be able to have the motivation to engage in this actually quite complex and messy and difficult socio-ecological issues and context. And also how you are using your agency, your own agency as an academic, as a researcher, to contribute to change and to promoting this and pushing for the idea of Earth stewardship. And then coming back to the rope metaphor as well, how, again, your role model in finding ways of, I think many of us in this sustainability research community want to connect our care and our engagement and dedication to these issues. And it's not always so easy to do that with your scientific practice and the roles that you have. So thank you very much for being a role model for that.
So it is time for coffee, but maybe just one question, just so you get also, and then rest they get to ask you in the coffee break. Do we have one question? Or maybe do you want to wait for the coffee break? Yeah, okay.
Thanks a lot. My name is Pepe Karlsson. I'm from the Department of Social Anthropology here at Stockholm University. I was really enjoying your presentation, Maria. I was thinking about, when you think, I think it's quite useful to talk about care. And for me, when you talk about care and relationship, it somehow suggests something different than when you talk about ecosystem services. And I'm thinking about whether you see a tension here, because the language of care, and if you also bring in indigenous knowledge, it's a different type of relationship where nature is not giving services to humans, but it's rather a sort of a mutual becoming. And I don't know whether you have explored that type of tensions in this stream, or what do you call it? Thanks.
Yes, that's the short answer. No, but of course, I mean, someone was saying before that words and language matter, and I think you may need different words and different language at different contexts. But I think with ecosystem services, a lot of these things were kind of lumped into the cultural ecosystem service domain, and I think that is very insufficient in a way. However, I would like to kind of emphasize the tradition of ecosystem service research that I have grown up in, or kind of is emphasizing very much how ecosystem services is an outcome of socio-ecological systems, so that you can view this, the care and this different ways of viewing the relation as part of the socio-ecological interlinked processes that generate ecosystem services. So I think there are ways of reconciliating. Mm-hmm. Connecting, but maybe ecosystem services is not the most useful one.